Billy Collins was born on March 22, 1941 in New York City and lived there until college. Collins began to write poetry at the age of 7. On a family road trip, he noticed a sailboat out on the East River and immediately wrote his observation of it. It was his first observational poem. Collins continued writing poetry throughout his adolescence. In his teenage years, his poetry took on a darker Gothic theme. Collins attended Catholic schooling all the way through high school. He later attended the College of Holy Cross and UC Riverside, where he received his PhD in English. In 1988, Collins published his first book, The Apple That Astonished Paris, and since then he has written several books of poetry including Picnic Lightning, 9 Horses, Sailing Around the Room, and Questions About Angels. Collins' work has been published in many magazines, including The New Yorker, Harper's, and Poetry Magazine. In 2001, Collins served as the Poet Laureate for the United States from 2001 to 2003, where he wrote poems for holidays, events, and other occasions. He also established the Poetry 180, a program where American high school students read a poem each day as part of their daily announcements. The program was designed to help give high school students exposure to contemporary poetry. He later went on to be the Poet Laureate for the state of New York from 2004 to 2006. One of Billy's first influences was his father. Billy's father was always cracking jokes. Billy's father helped Billy develop a sense of humor that is prevalent in Billy's poems. Billy's mother introduced Billy to poetry. She loved memorizing poetry, and thus served as a storehouse of poems for her son. She was also Billy's biggest supporter. Billy was influenced the most by his worst teachers. The ones that were discouraging and dismissing of his poetry motivated him to write more poetry so that he could prove them wrong.
In the 1950s, the nation recognized in its midst a social movement called Beat Generation.
When he was a teenager, Billy Collins was introduced to the beatniks and the poetry of Allen Ginsberg. Later, Collins was influenced by Wallace Stevens and tried to emulate Stevens' style by attempting to evoke a level of difficulty in his poems. He tried to be gratuitous and show-offy and camouflaging, experimental to a kind of insane degree, a difficulty which really ignores the possibility of having a sensible reader. The poetry had little connection to Collins' life experiences, and was more of a poetic device marvel than a poem with meaning. Collins was also influenced by Poetry Magazine. The magazine introduced him to the works of Carl Shapiro, Howard Nemerov, and Reed Whittemore. These contemporary poets were a breath of fresh air from the classical poets that Collins had studied in school. They rang with speech and sounded like talk, Collins said. These poems showed Collins that poets could still be considered great, even if they don't have fancy stylized poetry. These poets also showed Collins the importance of writing clear poetry that is easy to understand. Finally, Billy was influenced by Samuel Coleridge's poem, Conversations. At the start of this poem, the reader is at a simple location, and then is transported into an imaginative fantasy world. Later, the poems return the reader to the simplistic location, and the reader is spiritually changed and able to